Today, we're going beyond the headlines about the violence in Nigeria to really dig into something deeper, what you might call the architecture of insecurity itself. We're going to explore how this system was actually built, and maybe more importantly, who benefits from keeping it so broken.
So let's just start with a really big question. What if the common story you always hear about terrorism in Nigeria, the one that's all about religious fanatics and an outgunned army, what if that story is dangerously wrong?
Yeah, because that framing, it isn't just missing a couple of details. It's actively dangerous. Think of it like a smokescreen that hides the real reasons for the conflict, and in doing so, it protects the very systems that are actually profiting from all the chaos.
So how did we even get here? Well, this didn't just happen overnight. The violence has been evolving for 2 decades. It really kicked off in the early 2000s with groups like Boko Haram. By the mid-2010s, it had exploded into one of the deadliest terror campaigns on the planet. And today, the whole situation is way more complicated. It's this messy, fragmented landscape of jihadists, bandits, and kidnapping gangs who sometimes fight each other and, well, sometimes they even work together.
So to really understand what's going on, we first have to tear down some myths. Let's tackle some of the most common and most misleading stories that you hear about this crisis.
Okay, myth number 1. This is just a religious war. Now, while religion is absolutely used as a powerful tool for justification and for recruiting, it is not the root cause. The real fuel for this fire is a lot more grounded. We're talking about state failure, about widespread poverty, and a system where there's basically no consequences for violence.
And here's the second huge myth, that the Nigerian military just doesn't have the power to win this thing. But the reality is, Nigeria has one of the largest armed forces in Africa. The problem isn't a lack of soldiers or firepower. It's a system just riddled with corruption that siphons off all the resources. The money is there on paper, but it often gets drained away long before it can buy good equipment or properly pay the troops.
And that leads us to a central and pretty uncomfortable truth. The problem isn't just a failing system. In many ways, it's actually a system built on failure. This is what some have called the insecurity economy.
So what on earth is the insecurity economy? Well, it's this perverse system where the conflict itself becomes profitable. Think about it. A constant state of crisis justifies huge defense budgets, it grants emergency powers, and it opens up all these doors for corruption. In this completely twisted logic, actually solving the problem would mean turning off the money tap for the people who are profiting.
And the amount of money flowing into the system is, well, it's just staggering. Officially, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars allocated to defense and security over the years. It's like a river of cash. But the question is, where does it all go?
Because a lot of that money never actually reaches the front lines. It gets siphoned off through things like procurement scandals, where officials pay for faulty or sometimes even non-existent equipment. It disappears into the pockets of ghost soldiers, names on a payroll who don't actually exist. And of course, it gets lost in massively inflated contracts for even the most basic supplies and services.
When you have this much money flying around and this little accountability, a really grim reality starts to set in. Terror itself becomes a business model.
And there is no clearer example of this than the kidnapping for ransom industry. It's a terrifyingly simple and vicious cycle. Criminal gangs carry out these mass abductions, school children, travelers, basically anyone. The ransom payments they get from desperate families are then just plowed right back into funding their next operation. And since law enforcement is so weak, there's very little risk, which just allows the entire criminal enterprise to grow and expand.
Now, while it's so important to understand the economics of this crisis, we can never ever lose sight of what's truly at stake. Because behind the corrupt contracts and the systemic failures, there is a devastating and very, very real human price being paid every single day.
Tens of thousands of lives have been lost. It's a number that's so big, it's hard to even comprehend the scale of the tragedy that it represents for individuals and families.
And on top of those who've been killed, millions more people have been forced to flee their homes, creating one of the world's most severe internal displacement crises. Millions.
This quote really gets to the heart of the long-term damage. When an entire generation grows up knowing nothing but violence and survival, that trauma doesn't just fade away. It becomes embedded in the fabric of a society, and it can create these cycles of violence that last for decades to come.
So,
if the current approach is actually part of the problem, then what's the solution? Let's take a look at what actually works, what the source material here calls the real fight.
The path forward isn't about more guns or bigger budgets. It's about a fundamental change in strategy. It has to start with real security sector reform, demanding transparency and accountability for every single dollar spent. It means rebuilding trust with local communities, because their intelligence is absolutely vital. And crucially, it means fighting poverty with the same urgency as fighting terrorists. You see, jobs and education, they aren't soft solutions. They are essential tools for security. And really, it all hinges on one thing: honesty. An honest admission that the root of this crisis is internal and systemic.
And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway. The real fight isn't with guns on some battlefield. It's in the less glamorous, but far more important, work of reforming governance, demanding accountability, building an economy that works for everybody, and having the courage to face some really uncomfortable truths. That is the only path to a lasting peace. And it leaves us all with a final, lingering question. When a system is built on failure, what will it take to finally choose success?